Hey guys, it's Sabrina. Today I'm going to be sharing with you the most disappointing books that I read in 2024. I waited until January to do my end of the year content because I was just convinced I would read a book at the end of December that would have to be added onto one of these lists. So this is the beginning of the end of the year content and I hope you enjoy. Let's just get started. The first book that was one of the most disappointing books I read in 2024 is Death Valley by Melissa Broder. This book is following a woman who's dealing with a lot of stuff, particularly her father is about to die. So she's also trying to write a book. So she goes to this hotel near Death Valley Park and she's trying to get some inspiration. And then one day she just decides to take a hike. So she takes a hike through Death Valley and she finds this ginormous cactus and she slips inside and she sees things in the cactus. And that's as far as I'm going to go because I don't remember what's a spoiler and what isn't, to be honest. I read this a while ago. This book I was really excited about because it just sounded so fucking weird. Like the idea that she just slips inside this big old cactus and starts seeing things, like sign me up. I love the thought of that. It just sounds so surreal and it sounded like it was really going to explore a lot. And personally, I just found it boring. Like I really wanted to love this book and I really wanted to love Melissa Broder in particular because I hear a lot about her fiction. And it was just such a letdown for me because no matter what I did, I just could not enjoy this book. Like, unfortunately, the cactus only takes up, like, maybe 3 scenes, and the rest of the book is just her kind of wandering around the desert getting lost. And I know it was trying to, like, appeal to some of these deeper themes of grief by, like, talking about her father and stuff, but it just never really hit very hard for me, which I feel like makes me sound a little bit of a soulless person, but I promise I'm not. It just was not a book for me, and I found it so disappointing. The next book on this list is The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. This one hurts. This one especially hurts. So essentially, this book follows our main character. I think her name is like Lucretia. That's her name. Anyway, it follows a main character who's like a scullery maid, and she can do small bits of magic, but she keeps it a secret. And then one day her employer finds out that she can do these small little bits of magic, and she kind of makes her be like an entertainer for her guests so that her employer can try to like raise up her reputation. And then she catches the interest of a very important famous man, and then things just go awry from there. There's like a magical tournament, there's like another magical person, there's a lot of stuff in here. And at the end of the day, I did end up giving this 3 stars, but I just found it so disappointing because it took me like 10 days to read this. I know for a lot of people that's like not a significant amount of time, but I tend to read books in like a day or two maybe 3 or 4 days tops, but like it does not take me 10 days to finish a book. I just could not get into this book no matter what I did. Like I did not want to pick it up. I did not want to read. I would rather lay in my bed and stare at the ceiling than read this book. It was awful. And I did eventually get past that, but it took me a long time to get past that. Like I even remember during the magical tournament part of the book, I was thinking to myself like, why aren't I liking this? Like, why isn't this getting any better? A magical tournament is supposed to be fun and, like, exciting. And it just really wasn't until closer to the end. And I do think that it developed into a nice story, but I found this book to be particularly disappointing because I love Leigh Bardugo's writing. I've rated, like, every book she's ever written at least 4 stars, I'm pretty sure. Even the YA stuff, and I'm not really into YA stuff anymore, but I read some of her YA stuff this year, and I liked it. I really enjoyed it. So the fact that it was just such a hyped book because of the author and because I had such high expectations for the author, this one really let me down. Next is The Guest by Emma Cline. This book essentially follows like a young woman who is dating this older rich man. She's living with him and he doesn't know this, but she actually has gotten kicked out of her previous home, so she has nowhere else to go. He thinks she's just staying with him for the summer because he has this like summer house and this summer vacation spot. I don't know, it's a wealthy person thing. And then they kind of have like a tiff and a falling out, and he tells her to get out essentially. And she's kind of just like bopping around this island trying to figure out places to stay with people until like she can go back to him. He's having this party and she imagines that if she goes back for the party they're gonna make up and everything's gonna be fine. But yeah, she's just like kind of manipulating people into like letting them stay with her into letting her stay with them is what I meant to say. And I just found this book to be so boring. And like I was excited about it because it was really a book that I saw popping off on like TikTok and Bookstagram and stuff. Like it was like a lit fic girly kind of book, and I like those books usually. Like I love My Year of Rest and Relaxation. I love Play It As It Lays. Like I like some Joan Didion. I like some Eve Babbitt. So I usually like these lit fic girly books. But this one I just could not get into. I could not like this book. I even remember I described the plot of it to my friend Samira, and Samira was like, that sounds so boring. And this was after I had read it. And when she said that, I was like, yeah, that does sound boring. Why did I even want to pick this book up in the first place? And I know like a lot of people who read this book just kind of talked it up about like the author's great way of increasing tension slowly throughout the book. I didn't feel any of that. I just felt bored. This one was not it for me. I didn't gather up any of these books beforehand. I'm just like running around my room in between every take. Anyway, the next book on this list is Mary by Nat Cassidy. This book follows like a 50-year-old woman or something like that, 40s, something like a middle-aged woman named Mary. And she has just gotten fired from her job in New York as a bookseller. And she receives a call from her aunt, who she grew up with, telling her that she needs help because her cousin has left and she can't be on her own. So Mary flies back to her hometown to take care of her aunt, and while she's there, she starts noticing some weird things about her hometown and some weird things about her own childhood. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to leave it kind of vague because I think this is a book that's easy to spoil because there's so much happens during this book. But slowly you kind of start to figure out that her town is culty, that she had like a very interesting past that connects to the cult a little bit. And what can I say about this book? I just didn't like it. Like, I think I ended up giving it 2 stars. I maybe even gave it 3 stars because I felt bad for a low rating. I had such high expectations for this book because I kept seeing it listed with all like these great horror novels, and I kept seeing people recommend it. And 2024 was really the year that I got into horror personally. And so I had high expectations for this. I really thought I was going to love it. I loved hearing, like, the stuff I heard about it, I loved. They talked about, like, it having to do with, like, religion. And I liked that it followed an older female character, and I liked that kind of dealt with that in the book even. But it was a no-go. What can I say? I thought this book was a mess. I just feel like it was all over the place. I don't think it really knew what it wanted to be. It was juggling so many different like themes and so many different plot points. It just felt like this author had all these ideas for like different books that she could write. And I don't know the gender of this author. And they just decided to mush it all into one. And it felt like a very busy, very like overdone book. I did not like it, and it was very disappointing because I expected to love it. Next is A Kiss Before Dying by Ira Levin. This book I don't even have much of a memory of, if I'm being completely honest. I know that, so it follows this guy who just wants to be wealthy, and so he's dating this girl whose family has a lot of money, and he's trying to convince her to, like, marry him, and then she gets pregnant, and he's trying to convince her to get an abortion, but she doesn't want to get an abortion, so he's like, okay, I'll just kill you then. Is what he says. So, well, before that, he tries, like, poisoning her to, like, get rid of the baby, but she doesn't take the poison, and then he just decides to kill her, and it's kind of following, like, the aftermath of that. I don't know if any of that's a spoiler, because I don't remember much of the premise of this book, but this book was so bad, and I put this on the disappointing list, particularly because earlier in this year, I read The Stepford Wives and Rosemary's Baby by the same author. I was crazy about those books. Those books are both, spoiler alert, making it into my best books of the year video. So when I saw this book as like an ebook on Amazon for free, I was like, perfect. I want to read everything this author has ever written. Now I don't feel that way. I do not want to read everything this author has ever written. I don't even know if I want to read more of his books, which is crazy because I loved those other 2 so much. This one was just such a letdown because it was so boring. It was just like, just a stupid book. I'm so sorry. I did not like it. I do not think it's worth reading. Next on this list is The Soul of an Octopus. Oh god, what's the author's name? I don't know her name. I need to find it quick. Cy Montgomery is her name. The Soul of an Octopus, A Surprising Exploration to the Wonder of Consciousness by Cy Montgomery. This book I was super excited about because I love learning about animals. I took a primatology course in undergrad, and ever since I just want to read books about animals because we read this one book. This is a tangent, I'm going to go into it. We read this one book, and I forget what it was called. I'll remember it at some point. But it talked about like orangutans, and it talked about decolonizing extinction. That's the name of the book. Talked about orangutans in like a habitat that was, what's it called, like in a preserve where they were breeding orangutans. I kind of talked about how like what we were doing with the animals was like cruel, and maybe we just kind of need to let them go extinct because like is it worth keeping them alive and subjecting them to these kind of qualities of life? I don't know. It's been a while since I read that book, but I loved it. And ever since, I just want to read books that focus on animals so bad. So I saw this book at Barnes & Noble. I thought it was going to be perfect. I was like, I'm going to learn everything there is to learn about octopuses, and I'm going to be so happy because I'm going to have another author I'm going to love. And I looked up the author, and she's written books about, like, turtles and dolphins. I was like, oh my god, there's going to be so many animals I can learn about. I'm going to love this author. It's going to be a new favorite. It was not a new favorite. This book essentially is just like this author like visited this aquarium in Boston a lot, and she like hung out with her octopuses, and then she went deep sea diving and like saw octopuses in the wild, and she just loves octopuses, and she talks about how special it was to like touch an octopus and have a relationship with an octopus. And it's like, yeah, I'm sure those things were special, but it's not really that fun to read about. And like the whole little tagline is a surprising exploration to the wonder of consciousness, and I feel like it never really talks about that. Like, they kind of talk about how, like, each octopus has its own personality, but I feel like that's just a thing you know about animals. If you've ever had a pet, you know that already. The animals have their own personality. And that's all it had for me. That's all it really was. It was so disappointing because I thought that I was going to love this author and have all these books to read, and then I didn't. And I'm sad about it still. This book is in another room. I don't feel like grabbing it. And that is My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. Is that it? I haven't even pulled up the Goodreads thing in front of me. So essentially this book follows our main character, who's like a teenage girl in a poor town, but across the lake from her town this really rich new development is going up. And she essentially just becomes convinced that a slasher is going to happen in her town. Her town is going to be the next like slasher arena or whatever. She's obsessed with slasher films. So she spends the whole book like talking about all these references to slasher films, which I have never seen a slasher film, so I didn't get any of the references. It was very confusing to read about. And then she spends the rest of the book just so excited that this is going to happen. And I had really high expectations for this book because, again, it's a horror novel. It's an author and a novel that I've heard a lot about. I've heard a lot of hype surrounding. So I was expecting to absolutely love it, but I did not. Sadly, I did not. Again, she spends the whole book like wanting a slasher thing to happen in her town, and it's just like, why do you want that? Why do you want all the people of your town to be murdered? Like, I get that you're like an outcast and like you have a very sad family life and you kind of want your dad to be murdered, but why do you like, you have teachers that you like here, there are people that aren't so bad in your town, you just want them all, you just think it's fun that they're all gonna be like, killed? Like, I don't get it. And I just like, I could feel for the character in some ways because, again, of being an outcast, for being like a suicidal teenager, I was there. I get it. But I just could not vibe with this book. I could not. And I wanted to like it so bad. This was such a letdown. Then we have A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This is the book that was really hyped up for me. So essentially it's following one of Dracula's brides. You meet them in the beginning when she's just being turned into a vampire, and they're living this life and she loves him so much, and then like they're polyamorous, so they add a few other vampires into the mix. But the whole time Dracula is just like this completely toxic, awful person that's like controlling all of them, and they're all scared of him and none of them really like him. And I had heard this book hyped up so much. Like, people talked about how gorgeous the writing was, how it was like a beautiful story. I didn't get any of that. None of that. I'm usually someone who loves like lyrical writing. This book felt like it was trying so hard. It felt like every sentence was like being jammed down my throat as like a, look how pretty this is. Like, this is a pretty way to say this. And it wasn't. It felt like the author was trying so hard to make every sentence as pretty as possible. And it just came across as like trying way too hard, which I'm saying over and over again, but I don't know how else to describe it. It was just bad. It took me out of the story. I didn't like the story at all either. Like, I have polyamorous friends, okay? Like, I guess maybe not polyamorous, maybe just open relationship friends. I am not like that. I am so monogamous. It's crazy. So I don't really want to read a story about polyamorous people. Like, just because I can't relate to it at all, and it's not interesting to me. I don't want to read about it. It's not something that interests me in any way. I'm sorry if that's a bad thing. I just can't help it. Like, everyone has things they're just not interested in reading about, and that's one for me. And the whole time he was just like so toxic, and it was just like, okay, like, I get it. But it wasn't even in an interesting way. Like, I can read about like abusive characters and like unlikable characters, but the story is still interesting in some way. But I did not feel that way about this. Yeah, this one was a letdown. I really wanted to love this. I did not like it. Next is The Wall by Marlene. I'm reading off of Goodreads because I can never say her name. Marlene Haushofer, translated by Sean Whiteside. This is originally a German novel, and it takes place like in the Alps, and you're following this main character who is visiting her cousin and her cousin's husband in the Alps. Then one day they leave to go to town, leaving her there alone, and they do not come back, and she starts to worry. And eventually she realizes that this invisible wall has gone up between her and all of civilization. And she's stuck behind this wall with like a cow, a cat, and a dog, and she has to survive. This premise sounds so interesting to me. It still sounds so interesting to me, but I thought the book really fell short of it, or at least like what I wanted the book to talk about. I wanted to learn more about the wall, like it's the title of the book. That's the whole interesting thing about this book. I wanted to deal with that, but instead this book was just like a survivalist story. It just talked incessantly about like how she was getting food and how she was taking care of the cow and how the dog was her best friend and how she didn't like the cat but she kind of liked the cat and how she was going to keep warm for the winter and how she was going to have food for the spring. And it was just like, okay, I get it. It just was not that interesting. And I think like maybe I'm just not a person who likes that type of story, and I probably should have expected that going into it because like that's the whole premise. Like she has to survive with this wall. But I was just more interested in the wall itself, and I wanted to hear more about that. But it really has I don't want to say it has a little part of the plot because it's the whole plot. But the whole plot is that she can't leave anywhere else. But she really doesn't do much investigating or anything. She's just kind of like, oh, there's this wall there. Now I gotta deal with all this shit, So I didn't like it. It was a very big letdown. This one is perhaps my most disappointing book on the list. Maybe I should have put these in order. I didn't. But the most disappointing for me is Brutes by Des Tate. Oh, this book. I think the issue is that I didn't really know what I was getting into. I didn't hear much about the plot of this book. I just heard that it had to deal with like middle-aged girls who are like nefarious and disgusting and like just kind of like the brutal reality of like that age period. And I was so excited for a book on like girlhood and stuff that like showed how depraved girls can be. Like I was excited for that. Essentially it just ended up following, if I can remember, because I think I've removed I didn't understand most of this book, let me say that. So it wasn't really in my memory to begin with, and what little I knew about I think I've forgotten. But essentially this book followed like there's a girl in this town that goes missing and people start to look for her. And there's this group of middle-aged girls that are all friends and they have something to do with it, but you only like slowly figure out their part in that girl's disappearance or like the relationship they have with that girl. Oh my god, this book was like a fever dream. Like I thought I was gonna love this book. I thought it was gonna be a brand new favorite. I love the cover so much. I love like the neon colors and just I love it. But I could not get into it. Again, it felt like a fever dream. I felt like I couldn't grasp onto anything that was happening in the book. I just felt confused the whole time. I couldn't connect to any of the characters. Like, there's just nothing positive I can say about this book. I know that a lot of people ended up really loving it, and I am so jealous of them because I still wish I had loved it, Like, I wanted to love it. I wish I would have, but I just couldn't because I could not get into it. And the very last book that made my most disappointing books of 2024 list is Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. This was my first Eliza Clark book. And this book I had seen for like a few years online being hailed again. It's like one of those creepy, weird lit fic girl books. And I love that shit. I eat it up. So I really thought I was going to love this. And essentially it follows this girl who is a photographer, but she likes to take photos of like men in like nasty ways, like men nude with like a mask on or like a man jerking off. Like she likes to take photos of men like compromising positions kind of. And I thought I was gonna love this because one, that sounds great, and two, I'm also a photographer, so I thought I could relate to the character in that way. I was kind of excited for like discussions on art and stuff. I just could not get into this book no matter what I did. I tried so hard to like it and I could not. What did I say about it on Goodreads? I ended up I gave it 3 stars, right? I liked the deranged female protagonist. I love photography. I love horror. So I liked elements of it, but ultimately I was expecting this to be like a book that would really blow me away, and it did not. It ended up being kind of boring for the most part. I wrote in my review, it felt a bit lacking. I'm just left feeling like it could have been more of something. And I do think it's worth a read. I don't think this is a bad book. I want to say that about the bulk of these books in this video. I think one of them I called a bad book. I think in case Before Dying I did. Most of these books aren't bad books, and most of these books aren't books I gave 1 star, but they're just books I was expecting so much more of, and they really let me down in some way. And this book, again, for all the hype about it online, for all the people raving about it being a weird lit fic girly book, I was so sad. I'm still sad about this one. I almost didn't like when I get rid of books, I list them online to sell them. I almost didn't even list this one because like I wanted to reread it to like make myself like it, but I wasn't gonna do that. So this book is also up there. This is probably like number 2 most disappointing book of the year. So there you go. Those are all the most disappointing books that I read in 2024. Let me know what your thoughts are down below. Yell at me if I'm wrong. Like, tell me what books you thought were the most disappointing, and I can yell at you if I disagree. I promise not to yell at you. I'm a very nice person, I promise. And that's all for today. I'll see you soon with another video. Goodbye.